My daughter stole $43,000 from my account, thinking I'd never notice. And then she fled on vacation with her lazy husband and mother-in-law. And when I saw their photos abroad, smiling like lottery winners, I pieced it together, made one call, and what happened to them at the airport was just the start. The notification on my phone had read like a death sentence: account withdrawal, $43,000. And while I stared at those numbers, I watched my daughter's Instagram story from a luxury resort in the Bahamas, champagne in hand, posting about finally living the dream. And I made one call to my bank, then another to someone who specialized in making dreams turn into nightmares. And if you're watching this, hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Because trust me, you're going to want to see how this ends. The emergency call had come at 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, and nothing good ever happens before 7 a.m. unless someone's dead, in jail, or trying to rob you. And Jessica's voice had been shaking as she said, "Mom, something terrible happened," while in the background I could hear Tyler shouting and rushing water, or maybe that was just the sound of my retirement fund disappearing. And she told me the apartment flooded, a pipe burst upstairs, they had to be out by tomorrow. And I remember thinking, yes, the classic apartment flood emergency, right up there with my grandmother died in the teenager excuse handbook. Except Jessica was 28, and when I asked, "Are you okay?" she said, "We're fine, but we need deposits for a new place right now. Plus, Tyler's car broke down yesterday, and there it was. Multiple emergencies requiring immediate cash, a performance I'd seen countless times in 35 years of teaching. So I asked, 'How much do you need?' And she said, 'Maybe 8,000. I just need access to your account for a few days.' Access to my account, not a loan but complete access to decades of coupon clipping. And here's the thing about being a mother. When your child sounds distressed, common sense goes out the window. So I said, 'Okay, I'll add you to the account.' And she breathed, 'Oh God, Mom, thank you. I'll pay back every penny.' Famous last words. And by 10 a.m., Jessica had access to my $127,000 savings account, and I set up text alerts for transactions over $1,000. And the first alert came at 2:15 p.m. Withdrawal, $8,500. Okay. Apartment deposits. The second at 4:45 p.m. Withdrawal, $3,800. Tyler's car presumably, but when the third alert arrived at 6:20 p.m., withdrawal $12,000, I called Jessica and got straight to voicemail. And by Thursday evening my account had gone from $127,000 to $33,000 in 48 hours. And when I finally reached her Friday morning, she sounded different, distant, and said, "Mom, relax. Moving is expensive." And I said, "Jessica, this is more than we discussed." And she replied, "More issues came up. Don't worry about it," and hung up. So I drove to their apartment to see this flood situation myself and found the building bone dry. And Mrs. Garcia said, "Oh, the young couple. They moved out yesterday with suitcases, said they were going on a big trip." And then my phone buzzed, withdrawal, $43,000, and I opened Facebook and there it was, posted 2 hours ago, Jessica, Tyler, and Linda at O'Hare Airport with expensive luggage, grinning, captioned, "Surprise vacation. Sometimes you just have to treat yourself." And Tyler had commented, "When opportunity knocks, you answer." And Linda added, "Some people save forever and never actually live." And I sat in my car and laughed. Not happy laughter, but the kind that comes before you either have a breakdown or burn the world down. Because the flood was fake, the car trouble was fake, the emergency was fake, but my empty bank account was real as a heart attack. And I stopped laughing and got very quiet, because it was time to show Jessica what a real emergency looked like. The photos started rolling in like a slideshow of my financial destruction. Poolside cocktails at 11 a.m., designer shopping bags, spa treatments that cost more per hour than I used to make per day each photo. Captioned with "Living our best life" or "Finally learning to treat ourselves." And apparently treating themselves meant treating themselves to my money. And under a $300 massage photo Jessica wrote, "Learned that life's too short to make excuses." And Tyler taught me that happiness doesn't have a price tag. No, but happiness apparently had my bank account number. And the comments from friends were worse. "Oh my God. How can you afford this goals? What's your secret?" And Jessica's responses made me homicidal. "Just stop letting fear control my decisions. Sometimes you have to invest in your happiness." But the photo that sent me over the edge was Saturday night. Jessica, Tyler and Linda toasting at a beachfront restaurant. Tyler's caption to new beginnings and leaving old baggage behind. Some people spend their whole lives afraid to really live. Old baggage to 28 years of raising her was baggage, and Linda commented, the best revenge is living well. Some people never learn money is meant to be spent. And I googled private investigator Chicago, and that's how I found Robert Hayes, a former cop specializing in financial fraud whose office looked like a 1980s detective movie. And when he said, Mrs. Sullivan, this sounds like your daughter got mixed up with professionals, I repeated, professionals, because multiple emergencies, urgent account access, immediate vacation meant someone had been coaching her. So while Robert investigated Tyler, I called my bank and froze future transactions, then filed a police report. And Officer Martinez explained, since she had legal access, this will be complicated, probably a civil matter. Civil matter, because apparently there's nothing criminal about stealing your mother's retirement fund for vacation. But Robert called Tuesday with game-changing news. Tyler Carter has prior fraud cases in 3 states. Same pattern. Targets young women with family money access, creates fake emergencies, disappears. And when I asked, what about Jessica? He said, phone records showed dozens of calls between them for months. Mrs. Sullivan, your daughter's been planning this, Robert told me. And the words didn't just land, they settled into my bones. My daughter hadn't been manipulated. She'd been recruited, and Tyler and Linda were wanted in Florida for elder abuse, Arizona for identity theft. This was what they did professionally, and after I hung up, I stood in my kitchen staring at Jessica's graduation photo on my fridge, the cap tilted slightly, her smile so open and proud, and when I was done feeling sorry for myself, I looked in the mirror at a woman who had been played by her own child, but was still standing, and about to get creative. So I called Robert back and said, I want them arrested, all 3, and I want it to hurt. And when he asked, what did you have in mind? I smiled and answered, everything legal, and everything devastating. Because while Jessica was posting about her 3rd spa day, I was getting a PhD in revenge. And Robert's investigation revealed Tyler and Linda weren't just grifters, but were wanted in multiple states, had outstanding warrants, and owed massive back taxes, and over coffee strong enough to strip paint. Robert said, good news, they're already criminals. Bad news, they've stayed under federal radar. And when I asked what made something federal, he said, wire fraud at $50,000. They took $94,000 from you, plus others. That's FBI territory. And I repeated, FBI territory, because I liked the sound of it, and soon I'd found 4 other victims, total theft around $380,000, and over the next days, while Jessica shared couples massage updates, I built a case that would make Perry Mason jealous. I contacted the FBI, I contacted the IRS, I reached out to Tyler's previous victims who were suddenly very motivated for justice. But the real breakthrough came Saturday night when Jessica got drunk and stupid on Instagram Live, clearly wasted, going live poolside with, hey everyone, Jessica here live from paradise, and I started recording as she slurred about how amazing life is when you stop making excuses and start taking what you deserve. Taking what you deserve. Such an interesting way to describe theft. And Tyler leaned in, looking like a budget James Bond, saying some people spend their lives afraid and they decided to take the leap. And Jessica giggled that her mom always told her to save every penny, but Tyler taught her money is meant to be spent. Especially when it's just sitting there doing nothing, just sitting there, like paying for my retirement. And then Linda appeared with a martini, announcing young people need to stop waiting for permission and take what's yours. And Jessica warmed up, asking why her mom should hoard all that money when they could be living their best lives. Because she's never going to spend it anyway. And Tyler got philosophical, saying the best part is she probably doesn't even know yet. And they all burst into laughter until Jessica added, oh, she knows. I saw her calling 50 times. But what's she going to do? We're in the Bahamas, and for 20 full minutes they confessed to federal crimes in HD. And when they signed off, Jessica blew a kiss and said, don't let anyone tell you that you can't have everything you want. And I sent that video to Robert, the FBI, and anyone who might enjoy watching idiots confess to wire fraud. Then called Paradise Cove Resort and said I needed to speak with the manager about guests using stolen funds. And within an hour they discovered Tyler had used my cloned credit card for upgrades. So by Sunday, I had built a web waiting for their return, and Monday morning I put on my best dress and drove to O'Hare because it was time for Jessica's vacation to end. The international arrivals area buzzed with Monday travelers, but I positioned myself with a clear view, Robert standing beside me with FBI agent Sarah Martinez, who looked like she could bench press a car, and she said with satisfaction, "Everything's coordinated. They'll be detained, clearing customs." And when I asked, "All three?" she said, "All three." That live stream was a prosecutor's dream. And at 10:23 a.m. they emerged looking carefree, Jessica glowing with vacation tan, Tyler strutting like he'd conquered a country, Linda looking like she'd found the fountain of youth, and they walked straight into my welcoming committee. As an agent said, "Tyler Carter, you're under arrest for wire fraud," and his smugness vanished into, "What? This is a mistake," and more agents stepped forward. Linda Carter, conspiracy and fraud; Jessica Sullivan, theft and conspiracy, and Jessica dropped her designer luggage and looked around frantically until her eyes found mine, and I gave her a little wave as she mouthed, "Mom," and I smiled and mouthed back, "Surprise, sweetheart." And the handcuffs went on, and she wasn't the carefree vacationer anymore, but crying ugly tears, begging, "Mom, help me. This is a misunderstanding," while everyone stared, expecting me to rush to her aid. But instead I took a selfie with the arrest scene behind me as she cried, "Mom, don't leave me." And I posted it with, "Some people learn consequences the hard way. Justice, just proud mom." And then I walked away. That evening Channel 7 called and I told them I had video of Jessica confessing while on vacation, mocking me and laughing about theft. And they were very interested. And the story aired at 6:01 p.m. and went national by midnight. Her live stream playing everywhere as daughter mocks mother while spending stolen retirement money trended by Tuesday. And from jail Jessica called sobbing, "Mom, please, I need bail money, a lawyer." And I let her cry for 30 seconds before saying, "Jessica, you made your choice stealing from me and mocking me publicly. Now live with consequences." And when she said she was drunk and didn't mean it, I told her alcohol doesn't create thoughts, it removes filters. She meant every word. And when she pleaded, "I'm your daughter," I answered, "My daughter wouldn't steal my future for vacation. You're just someone who looks like her." And I hung up. And then the calls started coming from other families. "Mrs. Sullivan, I saw your story. I think my son's girlfriend stole from me." Two including Dorothy Chen, 74, Florida. Tylo took $68,000 through her daughter, and by Thursday I had connected with 6 victims across 4 states. Total theft $380,000, and I realized I had been the first to fight back, but I would not be the last, because suddenly I had an army. The media attention brought speaking opportunities. And that Saturday morning I stood before 40 seniors and said, "My name is Margaret Sullivan. 3 weeks ago, my daughter stole my retirement fund for vacation. Today, she's in federal custody facing 15 years. Let me tell you how to turn getting robbed into getting justice." And afterward people surrounded me with their own stories, their own heartbreak, and I understood I wasn't just getting revenge anymore. I was starting a revolution. Jessica's lawyer later explained her options: plead guilty for 8 years or risk 15 with a jury trial. And during our first jail visit in 6 weeks she asked, "What about restitution?" And she looked terrible. Orange wasn't her color, and the answer was $412,000, every penny stolen from all victims with interest. And she went white and said, "I don't have that." And I told her, "Then you'll make payments until Social Security if you live that long." And when she asked if I could drop charges or forgive the debt, I studied her face because even in jail she still thought I'd save her. And I reminded her of her live stream where she called me old baggage and said I was hoarding money I'd never spend. And when she said she was drunk, I told her that money she thought I'd never spend was being spent on investigators and lawyers making sure she faced every consequence. And when she asked if I was really letting my daughter go to prison, I smiled and said, "Honey, you created this mess. Clean it up yourself." Robert called with updates that brightened my week. They found Tyler and Linda's hidden assets, multiple accounts, some offshore, over $800,000 from dozens of victims, and after months of work, the FBI recovered $320,000, and I got back $41,000 of my original $94,000. Not complete, but enough to avoid cat food dinners. And every victim got partial restitution. And Dorothy Chen called crying when her check arrived, saying she got $45,000 back and she and her granddaughter were taking that Ireland trip. And that meant more to me than my own recovery. The trial began that fall and Jessica testified against Tyler and Linda, saying, I convinced myself my mother owed me for my childhood. Tyler didn't force me. He showed me how to justify it. And now I destroyed the most important relationship in my life for money I spent in 10 days. And Tyler got 22 years. Linda got 15. And Jessica got 6, with parole possibility in 4. After sentencing, she approached me and said she knew she didn't deserve forgiveness, but testifying felt like the first right thing she'd done. And she looked different, thinner, more serious. And I told her what she did was unforgivable, but what she was doing now mattered. And when she asked if we could try again, I wondered if I could trust someone who'd stolen my future, or love someone who'd called me baggage. But I said we could try, though it would be different. Different like she earned everything from scratch. Different like I never trusted her with money again. Different like she proved she was worth having a relationship with. And she nodded through tears and said not forgiveness, not yet, but possibility. And sometimes possibility is enough to build on. Jessica served 3.5 years. We exchanged letters but didn't speak because I needed distance, and she needed to figure out who she was without charm saving her. And her letters evolved from desperate pleas to genuine reflections. By year 2, she was teaching financial literacy to inmates. By year 3, she was in therapy and job training. And after release, she moved to a halfway house and got a nonprofit job, helping formerly incarcerated people reintegrate. And we met for coffee 6 months later, where she told me she was working at a reentry program helping people find jobs, housing, basic skills to avoid returning to prison. And the irony wasn't lost on either of us. And when I asked how it was going, she said good. That understanding manipulation made her good at helping people avoid being manipulated, like being bilingual, except it was criminal behavior and rehabilitation. And when I asked why this worked, she said it felt like penance. Maybe she could balance some damage she caused. And there was no self-pity, just acknowledgement she owed the world better. And when she asked why I agreed to meet with her, I said because she served time, was rebuilding responsibly, and was still my daughter, and those things mattered. And when she asked if I forgave her, I said I was working on it, like physical therapy, except rebuilding trust instead of muscles. And coffee meetings became monthly, then bi-weekly, carefully avoiding the federal case that brought us there. 2 years post-release, she called with surprising news that she'd been offered a promotion running a program, helping families affected by financial crimes, working with victims and families to help them navigate legal systems, understand rights, connect with resources, to be the person she wished I'd had. Perfect irony. And it paid enough for her own apartment out of the halfway house, and I told her to take it. And she said she wanted to, but asked about using our story professionally. And if she could help even one family avoid our nightmare, it might mean something. And I told her that was exactly what she should be doing. She started 6 months later and was surprisingly good. Understanding abuse from both sides made her excellent at helping victims and families heal. And one participant told me, "Your daughter saved my relationship with my son," saying Jessica helped her understand he could be sorry and still need consequences. 3 years post-release, Jessica called again with news that made me nearly choke. The FBI wanted to interview her about consulting, to hire her as a consultant, expanding their family financial crimes unit, wanting someone who understood these scams from both sides, wanting a former federal prisoner catching federal criminals. Basically, like Frank Abagnale did it for decades. I found myself trying to process the impossible transformation of my daughter, from prisoner to federal consultant. And when I asked her what she thought, she gave a small, almost disbelieving smile, and said it sounded like the kind of redemption story people write books about and nobody believes. So I asked her plainly, good or bad, Jessica? And she answered that if the FBI thought she could catch people like Tyler and protect families like ours, then maybe it was perfect. Though both of us understood that this would test whether her prison transformation was real or just another performance, and only time would tell. The FBI background checks took a full year, and during that long stretch our relationship shifted slowly from careful politeness toward something that almost felt normal again. Monthly dinners turning into real conversations about everything except her stealing my retirement fund, until one evening while cooking she said, "Mom, I need to tell you something," and I braced myself for another revelation. But what she confessed was that the night before the Bahamas, she had almost called me, almost confessed everything. And when I asked what stopped her, she said Tyler had convinced her I would never understand, that I would call the police, and she would go to prison for nothing since they hadn't technically stolen anything yet. Yet she admitted she knew it was wrong, knew it deeply. but had convinced herself it was justified wrong, and she paused to explain that therapy's hardest part wasn't admitting she was a criminal. It was accepting she wasn't Tyler's victim, but his willing partner. And that honesty meant more to me than any apology ever could. When the FBI finally cleared her, they held a ceremony that felt like we'd stepped into an alternate universe. Agent Martinez addressing me as Ms. Sullivan and saying her insights had already helped solve 2 cases during interviews, because she understood how these crimes develop within families. And watching Jessica take an oath to protect people she had once victimized felt surreal, yet also like justice, real transformation, not just punishment. And afterward we walked along the lakefront, and she asked if I ever thought about what would have happened if I hadn't fought back, if I had simply accepted being robbed. And I answered honestly that Tyler and Linda would still be destroying families. She would probably still be in prison, and I would be a bitter old woman, trusting no one. But instead Tyler was in concrete boxes where he belonged. She was protecting families, and I had learned I was tougher than I ever imagined. Then she asked something that still made me nervous: whether I would consider working with FBI Victim Services to help victims navigate legal systems, understand their rights, maybe even train agents. And though I had been doing advocacy informally, federal programs felt serious and intimidating, and I said I wasn't sure I was qualified. But she told me I was the most qualified person in America because I had survived family financial abuse, gotten justice, helped victims recover money, and turned my experience into helping people. And when I asked whether we would work together, she clarified that sometimes, when appropriate, but I would work as a victim advocate, not as her mother. And that distinction mattered enough that I agreed. 6 months later, I stood before 150 federal agents in Washington explaining that family theft victims suffered twice financial loss and trust betrayal, and that their job was helping them get justice for both. And afterward, a young agent approached to say his grandmother had been scammed by his cousin and was too embarrassed to report it, but after hearing my story he would encourage her to speak up. And I told him shame protects criminals while speaking up protects families. Over the next year, Jessica and I worked dozens of cases together, she interviewing suspects while I worked with victims. And though it was strange building a professional relationship with someone who had once robbed me, it worked. We were both good at what we did, and we were actually making a difference. Until the call came one Tuesday morning, as I prepared for a Detroit presentation, Detective Williams telling me my daughter had been in an accident, my heart starting what felt like interpretive dancing as I demanded to know if she was okay, and he said she was alive but in serious condition after a drunk driver hit her while she was crossing the street, and she had been taken to Northwestern Memorial, and I was driving before he even finished. Jessica lay unconscious, looking like she had fought a concrete mixer and lost her left leg in traction, her face bruised in impossible colors, enough machines around her to power aircraft. And I sat beside her and took her hand the way I had when she was 7, getting her tonsils removed, and whispered, "Hey, sweetheart, Mom's here." And when she woke 2 days later and saw me, she said, "You stayed." And I told her of course I had, because she was my daughter, and despite everything that had not changed. And she cried, not about legal troubles for once, but because she hadn't believed after everything I would come. And I told her that while I might not trust her with credit cards, I would always love her, that those were different things. The doctors said months of physical therapy, and I told her we would figure it out because her apartment had stairs and she couldn't drive and would need help with basics. So she would stay with me until she was mobile. And having Jessica in my house again after a decade felt like hosting a polite stranger who looked like my daughter but was different, quieter, considerate, grateful instead of expecting hun. During her recovery, we talked more honestly than ever before, she asking what I had felt when I saw those vacation photos, and I, admitting it, had been pure white-hot rage, beyond hurt, fury that she had stolen my future, and celebrated like she had won a prize. And she said she was sorry, and asked if I would ever really forgive her. And this time I told her I already had, because forgiveness isn't a feeling but a choice, and I chose it when I decided our relationship was worth rebuilding, even though I didn't trust her. Because forgiveness and trust are different animals. One is letting go of anger, and the other is believing someone won't hurt you again. And while I believed she had changed and was genuinely sorry, I also believed people make terrible choices when desperate. So I could forgive her while still protecting myself. And she nodded and said that was fair. After 8 weeks, she was ready to return to her life, And on her last night with me, we sat on the porch drinking tea when she handed me an envelope and said she had something for me. And inside was a check for $15,000. And when I asked what it was, she said it was part of what she owed me, saving from my FBI salary, she told me. And I understood that this check represented months of careful budgeting, real sacrifice, not a grand gesture, but disciplined intention. And my first instinct was to say, I can't take this. Yet she looked at me steadily and said, Mom, you didn't choose whether I stole from you, but you can choose whether to let me pay back. And in that moment I wasn't looking at the woman who'd robbed me, but at someone who had spent years making amends in quiet, consistent ways. So I exhaled and said, okay, I'll take it. And she blinked, almost disbelieving. Really? Really? And I nodded but added that I wasn't keeping it, which confused her until I explained I was donating it to her victim services program in both our names. And the tears that filled her eyes were different from the old ones. No desperation, no manipulation, just gratitude as she whispered, thank you. Thank you for giving it to me. 3 years later, she dropped a bombshell during Sunday dinner, announcing she'd been offered a promotion to head the FBI's new National Family Financial Crimes Task Force, and I set my fork down carefully as she explained they wanted a centralized unit handling family financial abuse nationwide, and that she would run it from Washington. Pride and terror mixing inside me because it was incredible recognition, but Washington was 700 miles away, and I told her that was amazing, even though it meant leaving Chicago, leaving me, leaving the honest and real relationship we had rebuilt, not the same as before, but solid. And she asked about our Sunday dinners, and I reminded her that they have phones in Washington and airplanes still fly between cities, and that we would figure it out like adults who had survived worse than distance. And then I surprised her by sharing my own news that the Department of Justice wanted me to head their National Victim Advocacy Training Program, traveling to train local law enforcement on financial abuse victims. And her eyes widened as she asked if I was taking it, and I told her I had already said yes, because apparently there is demand for people who know how to turn getting robbed by your daughter into teachable moments. And we both laughed, the first time we had ever truly joked about what happened. 3 months later, I watched her board a plane to Washington, and instead of heartbreak, I felt pride because my daughter would now protect families across America from exactly the pain we had endured. And that evening, Robert called to ask how I felt about her promotion and whether I was really okay with us working in similar fields. And I told him that 9 years earlier, Jessica had stolen my future. And now we were both spending our careers protecting other people's futures, and if that wasn't poetic justice, I didn't know what was. 6 months after that, I received a letter that made my week from Maria Rodriguez, who had attended my Phoenix presentation and wrote that my talk literally saved her family because her brother-in-law had pressured them to invest their retirement savings in his guaranteed business opportunity. And after hearing my story, she realized he was trying to scam them, so they didn't give him money, and later discovered his business was completely fake and they would have lost everything. And I placed that letter on my refrigerator with dozens of others before opening my laptop to prepare my next training program, because I had learned that the best revenge isn't destroying the people who hurt you, but using your pain to protect others from experiencing theirs. The next call came on a Saturday morning, exactly 9 years after Jessica decided my retirement fund would make excellent vacation money. Director Chen from the FBI Financial Crimes Division, telling me they had a situation in Oregon requiring my expertise involving the Morrison family, whose case had made national news after grandparents in their 80s lost their farm when their grandson stole $400,000 to cover cryptocurrency losses. And he explained the grandparents were struggling over whether to press charges and had specifically requested me after seeing my 60 Minutes interview. And 2 days later, I was sitting in a farmhouse kitchen in Portland that smelled of coffee and heartbreak, listening to Eleanor and Frank Morrison try to make sense of betrayal by the boy they had raised after his parents died when he was 12. Eleanor repeating that they gave him everything, and me gently reminding her that giving him love was not the same as giving him the right to steal from them. And when they asked how to move forward because He was still their grandson. I told them they had to decide what kind of family they wanted, to be one that enables destructive behavior through misplaced love, or one that holds people accountable while still caring. And over 3 days I shared my story and helped them navigate the worst family decision imaginable, explaining that pressing charges is not betrayal but accountability, and that betrayal would be letting him believe stealing from people who love him is acceptable. And they ultimately chose to press charges while maintaining their relationship, embarking on what I privately called an advanced course in loving someone who has committed crimes against you. And a year later, they wrote to say their grandson had pleaded guilty, was in gambling treatment, working 3 jobs to pay back the theft, and that the family was in counseling, rebuilding trust, one conversation at a time. Flying home from that trip, I realized something that surprised me at 71. I was genuinely happy. Not just content in retirement, but deeply purposeful. My life filled with meaning as I protected families, trained law enforcement, and helped people understand they didn't have to choose between love and justice. And Jessica and I spoke weekly as her career continued to rise, her task force recovering over $75 million for victims while she remained in therapy, maintaining healthy relationships, and seeming genuinely at peace, until one day she mentioned that 60 Minutes wanted a follow-up feature about USABAF, family financial abuse, recovery, radical redemption, and how our story had influenced federal policy, that they would follow our work for months and interview families we had helped to show how the system can work when people fight back. And though more national television felt both terrifying and exciting, when I asked what we would discuss, she answered simply, everything: the theft, the trial, the recovery, our current work, and how families can survive financial betrayal and come out stronger. I thought about all the families I had worked with, the Hansons, dozens of others who had somehow found the courage to hold relatives accountable while still fighting to maintain their relationships. And I knew that sharing our story publicly would be perfect, because if telling the truth about what happened to us could help even one more family survive this kind of betrayal, then it would be worth it. The piece aired 6 months later under the title, The Theft That Changed Everything: A Mother and Daughter's Journey from Crime to Justice. And the response was overwhelming, the phone ringing for weeks with families wanting help, agencies requesting training, victims sharing their survival stories. But the call that meant the most came from Jessica, who asked if I had seen the FBI's latest family financial crime statistics. And when I said no, and asked what about them, she told me they had gone up 400% since we started working together, that families were reporting crimes, fighting back, getting justice, and that we were actually changing things nationally. And that night I went to bed with a peace I had never known, understanding that my money had been stolen but returned with interest and purpose, that my daughter had betrayed me but redeemed herself through service, that our relationship had been destroyed but rebuilt into something stronger, and that while the theft was the worst thing that had ever happened to me, fighting back was the best thing I had ever done. 2 years later, at 71, I prepared for what I knew would be my final major media appearance, because I was ready to step back from speaking and focus on writing my book, How to Survive Being Robbed by Your Own Daughter and Other Family Adventures in Federal Court. And the Today Show invited Jessica and me to discuss the 5-year anniversary of the National Family Financial Crimes Task Force and its record-breaking $500 million recovery for victims. And in the green room, Jessica asked if I was sure I wanted to retire from speaking, and I told her I had said what I needed to say about family betrayal and federal justice, and that it was time for other voices, preferably people who hadn't gotten famous for having their retirement funds stolen. And she smiled and said I would be missed because not many people could make family financial abuse both educational and entertaining. But I reminded her that good advocates leave while people still want to hear from them. The interview went well. We talked about holding family accountable, about resources for victims, about how families can survive even the worst betrayals. And when the host asked what I would tell a viewer who had just discovered someone they loved had stolen from them, I looked directly into the camera and said they had a choice: to be a victim forever or to fight back and turn pain into power, that it would not be easy but it would be worth it, and that if they were lucky they might even end up with a better relationship than before someone robbed them. Afterward, we walked through Central Park discussing the future, and Jessica said she had been thinking that when I wrote my book she would like to write the foreword. And when I asked what she would say, she answered that the worst thing she ever did led to the best thing she became, that redemption is possible but requires more than saying sorry, that it requires proving you have changed every day for years, and that accountability and love are not opposites, but partners. And we sat quietly watching families enjoy ordinary Sunday afternoons, parents and children who probably had never been through federal court together. And she told me sometimes she thought about what would have happened if I had not fought back. And when I asked what she believed would have happened, she said she would still be hurting people, maybe in prison for something worse, or dead from whatever criminal activity she might have graduated to, or simply empty, living off other people's pain, and that instead she woke up every morning knowing her work mattered, that she was protecting families, helping victims, making the world safer, as if she had been given a completely different life. And when I asked how that felt, she said it felt like she was finally worthy of being my daughter. And I took her hand and noticed how different it felt, now steadier, more honest, belonging to someone who had learned the difference between taking and earning. And I told her she had always been worthy of being my daughter. She had just needed to learn to be worthy of herself. That evening, I received a package with no return address containing a newspaper clipping with the headline, "Mother-Daughter Team Helps FBI Recover Record $500 Million in Family Fraud Cases," and a note that read, "Mrs. Sullivan, thank you for showing us that love and justice aren't opposites. They're partners. Our family is whole again because of your example. Signed, the Morrison family." And I placed the clipping into my scrapbook with hundreds of others documenting our journey from crime to justice, betrayal to redemption, family destruction to family protection, then sat down at my computer and began writing the opening line of my book. The theft was just the beginning. What came after was up to me, and I chose revenge, but not the kind that destroys, the kind that rebuilds, because I had learned that the most powerful revenge is not destroying your enemies, but transforming your pain into protection for others. And that kind of revenge does not just last forever. It grows better with time, influences policy, recovers millions for victims, and occasionally gets you on national television twice. And 9 years after my daughter stole my retirement fund for vacation, we had helped hundreds of families find justice, recovered $500 million for victims, and proved that even the worst betrayals do not have to define your future, because sometimes the best thing that can happen to you is the worst thing that ever happened to you, since it shows you exactly how strong you really are. And thank you for listening. Do not forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments, because your voice matters.